My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Claremont, Ohio, in a yellow house on Birchwood Drive, with two parents who loved my brother more than they loved the truth. And I have the bank statements to prove it. The day I found out, it was a Tuesday in November. I remember that specifically because I had just gotten off a 12-hour shift at St. Augustine's Hospital, where I was finishing the last semester of my nursing residency. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic and cold cafeteria coffee. I had $47 in my checking account, a student loan balance of $93,000, and a smile on my face because, and this matters, hold that detail. I had just been offered a full-time position in the pediatric ICU, the first real job of my adult life, the one I had scraped and borrowed and bled for. I sat in my car in the parking garage on the fourth level, row C, and I called my mom to tell her. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Oh, that's great, honey." And then without a single breath of pause, she said, "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. You know that account Grandma Helen set up for you? We had to use some of it, for Darius. Some of it. Some of it. I want you to remember that phrase, because by the time this story is over, you're going to understand exactly what some of it means when the people saying it are the ones holding the keys. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. This channel exists because of people who needed to hear that they weren't crazy, that what happened to them was real, and that surviving it, not just surviving, but building something beautiful on the other side, is possible. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here a while, you already know what we're about. And I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. Seriously, pause the video. Drop it. I love reading every single one, and it always amazes me how many corners of the world this little channel reaches. Let me take you back to Claremont, Ohio, the summer of 1999. I was 6 years old. My brother Darius was 4. Claremont is one of those mid-sized Midwestern towns that smells like cut grass and car exhaust, and something faintly sweet from the Halcyon Foods processing plant on Route 9. 38,000 people, 2 high schools, 1 mall that was slowly dying, a Dairy Queen that never died, and an unshakable belief among its residents that everything that happened inside its borders was somehow more real and more important than anything happening elsewhere. My parents, Kenneth and Lorraine Osei, had lived there their whole lives. My father worked in insurance sales at Midwest Mutual. My mother taught 3rd grade at Claremont Elementary. On paper, they were a perfectly respectable family. What they were in practice was a little more complicated. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Helen Marsh, was the one who really raised me in all the ways that count. She lived 12 minutes away in a brick duplex on Fenwick Street, and she had a garden full of marigolds and a kitchen that always smelled like cardamom and burnt sugar, and she used to sit me on the counter while she cooked and tell me things that I wasn't supposed to know yet. Not secrets, exactly, just truths. "Nadia," she'd say, "the world will try to make you small, don't you let it." She had gray lacks and reading glasses she was always losing, and a laugh that came from her whole body. She was the loudest, most generous, most uncompromising person I have ever known. When I was born, in 1993, Grandma Helen opened a custodial savings account at First Federal Bank of Ohio in my name. She put in $500 to start. Every birthday after that, every Christmas, every time she sold a piece of her needlepoint work at the Claremont Arts Fair, she added to it. She told me about it when I was 9, sitting at her kitchen counter with a glass of ginger tea. She said, "This money is for your education, not for anything else. For your brain, because your brain is the one thing nobody can take from you." She made me look at the account statement. At that point, it had $14,000 in it. To 9-year-old me, it looked like all the money in the world. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that over the next decade, through careful saving and a small inheritance from her own mother, and a few shrewd investments in municipal bonds she'd read about in a library book, Grandma Helen would grow that account to $187,400. And what I also didn't know was that my parents had been named as co-custodians. That detail matters. Hold it. Now, let me tell you about Darius, because this story isn't about hating my brother. I want to be clear about that from the start. Darius is 2 years younger than me, and he is charming in the way that people who have never been told no are charming, which is to say, effortlessly, and without any awareness of how much it costs everyone around them. Growing up, Darius was the funny one, the social one, the one who could walk into any room and have everyone laughing inside of 90 seconds. My parents adored him. I'm not using that word loosely. They adored him in the way that some parents adore a child who reminds them of their own best self, who performs the version of their family that they most wanted to be. I was the serious one, the studious one, the one who made straight A's and didn't complain and needed apparently very little in the way of acknowledgement. There are 3 specific moments from my childhood that I want to tell you about because they form the architecture of everything that came later. The first happened when I was 11. My school, Jefferson Middle, had a 2-week summer enrichment program at Ohio State University in Columbus. Science, writing, mathematics, hosted on the actual campus with real professors. The cost was $800, which included housing, meals, and materials. I had been saving my birthday money and my allowance in a little tin box under my bed. I had $312. I needed $488 more. I asked my parents. My father said it was a lot of money. My mother said she'd look into it. 3 weeks later, when the registration deadline passed, no one said anything. That same week, they signed Darius up for a $650 travel baseball league with a custom jersey and new cleats. I told myself it didn't hurt. I was 11. I told myself a lot of things that didn't hurt. The second moment happened when I was 14. My biology teacher, Mr. Portero, nominated me for a regional science competition. There was a $200 entry fee plus travel costs to Cincinnati. My mother said, "We don't really have the budget right now." 2 days later, she spent $340 on new living room curtains that she'd seen at Pottery Barn. I remember standing in the doorway looking at those curtains, which were a very nice shade of cream, and understanding for the first time that the budget was not the issue. I did not enter the competition. I told myself it didn't matter. The third moment happened when I was 17, the night of my academic honors banquet at Claremont High. I had the highest GPA in my class. The school gave out small medallions. My parents were supposed to be there. My father sent a text at 6:47 p.m. The banquet started at 7. That said, "Darius has a playoff game, so sorry, so proud of you." My grandmother was in the front row. She stood up when they called my name. She clapped so hard her reading glasses fell off her nose. After the banquet, in the parking lot, while I held my medallion and watched the other families take photos, Grandma Helen put her hand on my cheek and said, "I see you, baby. I have always seen you." And then she said something I didn't fully understand until years later. She said, "And I have made sure of it." If you've ever been the invisible child, the one who got good grades and stayed quiet and was supposed to be fine, type "seen" in the comments. Because I see you too. I promise. The account at First Federal kept growing through my high school years, though I didn't know the exact balance. Grandma Helen would update me occasionally. "It's doing well," she'd say, tapping the side of her nose, but she never gave me the full number. "You'll know when you need to know," she'd say. "Right now, just focus on your grades." I focused on my grades. By senior year, I had a 4.1 GPA, 3 AP classes, 240 hours of volunteer work at Claremont General Hospital, and a genuine, crystallized, bone-deep understanding of what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a nurse. Specifically, a pediatric nurse. I had watched nurses work in that hospital, had watched how they moved through a room and what their presence did to a scared child. And I knew, the way you sometimes just know things, that it was what I was made for. I applied to 6 nursing programs. I got into 4. I chose Forsyth University in Cincinnati, 2 hours from Claremont, because it had the best pediatric nursing track in the state, and because the campus had a courtyard with an oak tree in it that I saw in the brochure and felt, stupidly, was a sign. Forsyth was not cheap. 4 years of tuition, housing, fees, approximately $112,000, after institutional aid that knocked $18,000 off the sticker price. Plus books, clinical supplies, transportation, living expenses. The full picture, realistically, was around $165,000 to $175,000 over 4 years. When I got my acceptance letter in March of my senior year, I called Grandma Helen first. She started crying immediately. Happy crying, the kind that sounds a little bit like laughing. She said, "Okay, it's time for you to know." She told me the account balance, $187,400. She said, "It's yours. Every penny. Your parents are co-custodians, which means they have to sign off on disbursements, but it's in your name and it's for your education. That's always been the condition." I remember sitting on my bedroom floor with the acceptance letter in my lap and feeling something I can only describe as structural, like something in me had been suspended in mid-air for years and had finally found the ground. I was not the invisible child. I was the planned-for child. I had $187,400 and an oak tree waiting for me, and a future that was mine. I should have known even then that something so solid can still be taken. The summer before I left for Forsyth was the best summer of my life in many ways. Grandma Helen and I went to the Cincinnati Zoo in July, just the two of us. We ate bad elephant ears and watched the hippos for 45 minutes, and she bought me a stuffed giraffe from the gift shop that I still have on my dresser today. In August, she helped me pack. She sat on my bed and folded my clothes with that particular origami-like precision she had, and told me things I needed to hear. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there. Call me every Sunday. Eat breakfast. Real breakfast, not coffee. Remember that difficulty is not failure. It's just difficulty. I left for Forsyth on August 28th, 2011. I was 18 years old. My parents drove me. It was a civil trip. Not warm, but civil. My mother had bought me a new set of towels in Forsyth's school colors, navy and gold, which was a kind gesture, and I thanked her for it. My father carried the heavy boxes without complaining. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot of my dormitory. My mother hugged me a little longer than I expected. The first disbursement from the education fund came through in September. Grandma Helen had worked with First Federal to set up a schedule. Tuition disbursements went directly to the university bursar's office, and a monthly stipend of $800 came to a checking account she'd opened for me, for living expenses. It was clean. It was clear. It worked. For 2 years it worked. I want to walk you through the next part carefully, because the details matter. In the spring of my sophomore year, April 2013, Darius, who was then 19, enrolled at a for-profit technical school called Pinnacle Career Institute in Columbus. Pinnacle offered programs in automotive technology, HVAC, and criminal justice. Darius was enrolled in the criminal justice program. The cost was $22,000 a year. I didn't know this at the time. What I did know was that in May 2013, my monthly stipend dropped from $800 to $400 without any explanation. I called my mother. She said there had been some adjustment. I asked what that meant. She said the account was being managed differently now. I asked if I should call First Federal directly. She said, "Let your father handle it, Nadia. Don't make this into something." I let it go. I picked up extra shifts at the campus coffee shop. I told myself $400 was manageable. It was not manageable, but I managed. In the fall of my junior year, September 2013, the stipend stopped entirely. No call, no warning. I checked my account on a Thursday morning before my 7 a.m. pharmacology class, and the deposit that was supposed to be there wasn't. I called my mother from the stairwell of the science building. She didn't answer. I called my father. He didn't answer. I called Grandma Helen, who by then was 76, and moving a little more slowly but still sharp as a blade. She answered on the first ring. I told her what was happening. There was a very long silence. Then she said, "Nadia, I'm going to make some calls. Don't you worry. Don't you worry." Her voice had something in it that I had never heard before. I didn't have a word for it then. Looking back, I think the word is grief. 2 days later, she called me back. She had spoken to someone at First Federal. What she was told, and I need you to understand how each one of these words landed, was that the co-custodians had made a series of withdrawals from the account over the past 18 months. The balance, which had stood at $187,400 when I started college, was now $12,000. $12,000 out of 187,400. I was sitting in my dorm room when she told me. My roommate, Priya, was asleep in the bed 6 feet away. I remember looking at the wall and feeling like the room had tilted slightly, like gravity had shifted 2 degrees. I held the phone very still against my ear, and I said, "How much did they take?" Grandma Helen said, "About $175,000. I said, "Where did it go?" She said, "I'm still finding out." I said okay. I said I had to go. I hung up, and I sat very still for a very long time. Priya woke up around noon and asked if I wanted lunch. I said no. She brought me a granola bar anyway. I ate it, staring at the wall. If you have ever received news so large that your body just went quiet, type still in the comments. That stillness. That terrible, clarifying stillness. Here is what Grandma Helen found out over the following 3 weeks, through phone calls and a formal records request to First Federal, and a conversation with a retired bank manager named Gerald Cho, who had known our family for years, and who, God bless him, was not willing to pretend he didn't know what had happened. Between September 2012 and August 2013, my parents had made 11 withdrawals from the education account. The withdrawals ranged from $8,000 to $24,000. They totaled $174,800. The money had been used for the following: $44,000 to Pinnacle Career Institute for Darius's first 2 years of tuition and fees, $28,000 for a down payment on a new house. My parents had decided to upsize from Birchwood Drive to a 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Lane, a neighborhood they had always wanted to live in. $18,500 for a Ford F-150 pickup truck that my father had wanted for years. $12,000 for a kitchen renovation at the new house, with quartz countertops that my mother showed me on Instagram 18 months later. $9,300 for a family vacation to Cancun, which I was not invited on, and which I knew had happened because Darius had posted photos. The remaining $63,000 disbursed over the course of the year in smaller increments that appeared to have been absorbed into the general household budget. Every withdrawal had required the signature of both co-custodians. Both of my parents had signed. I called my father on October 14, 2013. I had waited 3 weeks because I needed to be calm. I was calm. I said, "Dad, I know what happened with the account. I need to understand why." He said, "Nadia, this is a family matter and it's complicated." I said, "You took $174,800 that Grandma Helen put in my name for my education." He said, "Your grandmother set up that account incorrectly. There were always intended to be shared benefits." I said, "She set it up for me specifically. It was always for me." He said, "You're being dramatic." He said it gently, which was somehow worse. I called my mother that same night. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said they had intended to pay it back. She said Darius had really needed the opportunity. She said the house had been a family investment. She said, "You're so capable, Nadia. You always land on your feet." I said, "Mom, I'm 20 years old. I have $12,000 left, and 3 semesters of nursing school, and $80,000 in student loan capacity, and I don't know how I'm going to do this." She said, "You'll figure it out. You always do. You always do." As though my capability was the natural and sufficient answer to their theft. I sent 14 emails over the next 6 weeks. To my parents requesting a repayment plan. To First Federal, asking what legal options I had. They could not advise me. To the Ohio State Banking Authority. To a legal aid office in Cincinnati that told me, gently, that because my parents were named co-custodians, and because the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act in Ohio had some limitations in this area, my options were complicated. Not impossible, but complicated. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I was 20 years old and I had $12,000 and a full course load and two part-time jobs, one at the campus coffee shop and one as a nighttime pharmacy technician at a CVS on Vine Street. I worked 32 hours a week on top of full-time school and full-time clinical rotations. I slept 5 hours a night on average. I started keeping a small notebook where I wrote down everything I ate so I could stretch my grocery budget to $40 a week. I did not drop out of Forsyth. I want to say that again. I did not drop out. I should tell you about Grandma Helen during this period, because she was not sitting quietly. When she found out what my parents had done, she did several things in rapid succession. She removed my parents from any other financial instruments she held. She consulted with her own attorney, a woman named Bettina Ware, who had an office above the dry cleaner on Main Street. She wrote a formal letter to my parents, through Bettina, demanding repayment of the full $174,800 with 30 days' notice. She received no response. She told me that she had done this, and she told me what she planned to do if they continued to ignore her. I asked her to wait. I was not ready. I was still in the part of the story where I believed that some quiet version of repair was possible, that my parents would eventually feel the weight of what they had done, and that we could find our way to something that didn't require burning everything down. I was still in some corner of my heart, hoping that my mother's tears on the phone had meant something. I finished my junior year on 4 hours of sleep, and caffeine and a pride so fierce it scared me sometimes. I finished my senior year the same way. I graduated from Forsyth University School of Nursing in May 2015, with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and a GPA of 3.7 and $93,000 in federal student loans that I would not have had if my grandmother's $187,400 had been used for what it was intended for. I had earned every single dollar of that debt on my own merits. But I want you to sit with what those loans represent. They represent my parents' choice. Every interest payment I made for the next 8 years was a direct consequence of that choice. My parents came to my graduation. I had not told them not to. I was not ready for that conversation either. My mother cried when I crossed the stage. She hugged me afterward and said she was proud of me. My father shook my hand. Darius, who had lasted 1 year at Pinnacle before dropping out, which means approximately $44,000 of my money bought him 1 year of a criminal justice certificate he did not complete, was not there. He was in Columbus, doing something with cars, my mother said vaguely. Grandma Helen was in the front row. She stood up when they called my name. She clapped so hard her reading glasses fell off her nose, just like she had at the honors banquet, just like she had always done. After the ceremony in the university courtyard, by the oak tree from the brochure, which was real as I had hoped, she held both my hands and looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You know I'm still going to do it." I said, "I know, Grandma," she said. "I just wanted to give you time." I said, "How much more time do you need?" She smiled. It was not a soft smile. "Not much," she said. "Not much at all." I moved back to Claremont that summer 2015. Not because I wanted to, but because the pediatric nursing jobs I was most interested in were at Claremont General and St. Augustine's Regional, both within commuting distance, and because rent in Claremont was $650 a month for a one-bedroom apartment on Harwick Street, compared to $1,200 in Cincinnati, and the math was not complicated. I had $93,000 in student loan debt, and my parents owed me $174,800, and I was 22 years old, and I was going to be absolutely fine. I started at Claremont General in September 2015 in the general medical unit working nights. It was hard work. I loved it completely, and without reservation. There is something about the nighttime in a hospital, the particular quality of the quiet, the way the fluorescent lights hum differently at 3 a.m., the way patients tell you things in the dark that they wouldn't say in daylight, that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. I was good at the work. I was, without false modesty, very good at it. I lived small. I cooked most of my meals. I had one streaming subscription, which I split with Priya, who had also moved to Ohio after school. I drove a 2007 Honda Civic named Gerald after the bank manager who had helped Grandma Helen get the records. I made my student loan payments every month, sometimes more than the minimum. I did not buy new clothes unless something wore through. I saved every dollar I could find. What I was building, without quite naming it that way yet, was a life, steady, mine. My parents and I had a civil and mostly hollow relationship during this period. I saw them at Christmas. I saw them occasionally for Sunday dinner. We did not discuss the account. They seemed to have collectively decided that because I was employed and functioning, the matter was closed. My mother once said, in passing, "You know we always meant to pay it back," and I said and changed the subject because I had learned by then that there are conversations that can only happen when you're ready to have them all the way. I was not ready yet. I was still building. Grandma Helen turned 80 in January 2016. We had a party at her house. Her real friends, her card club, the women from her church, a few neighbors, Bettina the attorney, who had become something more like a friend by then, and me. My parents attended. It was cordial. Grandma Helen wore a red dress and danced to Aretha Franklin in her kitchen and cut a lemon cake herself because she didn't trust anyone else to do it right. At some point in the evening, she took me aside into her small back study, the room where she kept her books and her needlepoint frames, and a framed photo of me at my nursing school graduation, front and center above the desk. And she said, "My will is set. Bettina has the documents. There are some things in here," she patted a small wooden box on the shelf, "that you're going to need when the time comes." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. I wanted to say, "Don't talk about the time coming." I said, "Okay, Grandma." She looked at me steadily. "The whole town is going to know," she said. "I want you to understand that before it happens." I said, "I understand." She said, "Do you? Because it's going to be very public." I said, "I know what you built for me. I know what they did with it. I trust you." She patted my hand. She went back out to the party and danced to Aretha Franklin some more. If you've ever had someone in your corner so completely, so unconditionally, that their love felt like a structural fact of the universe, drop a heart in the comments. Because that's what she was. That's what she was. In March 2017, I transferred from Claremont General to St. Augustine's Regional Medical Center and moved into the pediatric ICU. It was the position I had been working toward since I was a teenager, watching nurses move through rooms, since I sat in Grandma Helen's kitchen with a glass of ginger tea and listened to her talk about the importance of a good brain. The pediatric ICU is not an easy place to work. I want to be transparent about that. It is a place where children are fighting for their lives, and you are one of the people standing between them and the worst possible outcome, and the weight of that is real and constant. But it is also, and I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong, the most meaningful work I have ever done, every single shift. I was good at this too. By the fall of 2017, I was a charge nurse. By 2018, I was being asked to precept new nurses, to train the people just coming into the unit. I had started a small side work as a notary public, $10 here, $25 there. It sounds ridiculous, but it added up. And I had increased my loan payments, and I was slowly building something that looked like financial stability. I also had friends. Real ones. Priya had become my closest friend, my person, the one I called when the hard nights were hard. I had a friend named Tomas, a respiratory therapist at St. Augustine's who was funny and reliable, and brought coffee to 7 a.m. shift meetings without being asked. I had a friend named Deja, who I had met at a Claremont community garden where I had started growing vegetables to lower my grocery bill, and ended up loving the dirt. These people were my family in the truest sense, the chosen, deliberate, earned kind. Grandma Helen had a health scare in September 2018. A fall in her kitchen, a fractured wrist. She was fine, more annoyed than injured, she said. But it was the first signal that time was doing what time does. I started checking on her more. 2 or 3 times a week. I brought food. I helped her with the garden. We watched the evening news together and argued pleasantly about everything. She was still sharp. She was still herself. It was during one of these evening visits, in November 2018, that she told me what she had done. She was sitting in her reading chair with a cup of tea, and she looked at me with her reading glasses pushed up on top of her locks, and she said, "Nadia, I need to tell you about the letters." I sat down. She said that over the past 6 months, she and Bettina had prepared and sent formal letters to 47 people, members of my parents' church, colleagues of my father at Midwest Mutual, parents of children who had been in my mother's third-grade class, members of the Claremont Teachers Association, longtime family friends. The letters documented, with full specificity and attached bank records, what my parents had done with the education fund. The letters did not accuse. They did not editorialize. They simply stated, in plain language, an education fund of $187,400 was established by Helen Marsh for her granddaughter Nadia Osei. Between September 2012 and August 2013, co-custodians Kenneth and Lorraine Osei made withdrawals totaling $174,800. These funds were not used for Nadia's education. Nadia graduated with $93,000 in student loan debt that would not have existed otherwise. 47 letters. Signed by Helen Marsh with Bettina Ware listed as attorney. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, "When did they go out?" Grandma Helen smiled. "November 1st, she said. 2 weeks ago." I said, "And?" She said, "I've received 11 phone calls from people wanting to know if there's anything they can do." I said, "From who?" She said, "Sandra Reeves, who was my mother's oldest friend, a woman who had been in our house 100 times, and who my mother considered one of her closest confidants. Gerald Porter, the bank manager, Reverend Okafor, the pastor of my parents' church." She kept going. She named 8 more people. I sat very still. She said, "Your mother called me 2 days ago. She was very upset." I said, "What did you tell her?" Grandma Helen said, "I told her she should have thought about that before she signed her name to 11 withdrawal slips." I looked at this woman. This 82-year-old woman in her reading chair with her tea and her locks and her absolute unshakable certainty, and I thought, she has been planning this for years. She has been waiting patiently for me to be stable enough that what was coming couldn't knock me down. She had timed it. She had built a wall around me first, and then she had opened the door. "Grandma," I said. "Yes, baby. I love you so much." She patted my hand. She picked up her tea. She said, "I know. Now let's watch the news." The next 2 weeks were seismic. My mother called me 4 times in the first 3 days after I found out about the letters. I let the calls go to voicemail the first 3 times. On the 4th call, I picked up. She was crying, not the gentle, apologetic crying from when I'd confronted her in 2013, but something uglier, something with more panic in it. She said people were talking. She said Reverend Okafor had asked my father for a meeting. She said Sandra Reeves had canceled their standing Thursday lunch. She said this was not fair, that Grandma Helen had no right to do this, that it was private family business. She said the word private several times. I said, "Mom, it wasn't private when you took the money. It wasn't a private decision that I spent 4 years working 2 jobs to finish a degree that was already paid for." She said, "We were going to pay it back." I said, "You didn't." She said, "We didn't have the money." I said, "You have quartz countertops." Silence. I said, "I'm not angry, Mom. I want you to understand that. I'm not calling you to yell at you, but I'm also not going to pretend that what happened was a minor thing, or that Grandma did something wrong by telling the truth. The truth was always going to come out. You just got to choose when." She said, "So this is revenge?" I said, "No, this is a record. There's a difference." My father called once. It was a 3-minute conversation. He said he thought what my grandmother had done was an attack on the family. I said, "Dad, what you did was an attack on me." He said, "I provided for this family for 30 years. I said, "That's not what I said." He said, You don't know what it cost to raise two children. I said, I know exactly what it cost. $174,800. Your mother-in-law paid it, and you took it. He didn't say anything after that. I said, I'll talk to you when you're ready to have a real conversation. And I hung up. The meeting with Reverend Okafor happened on a Tuesday. I don't know exactly what was said. Reverend Okafor called Grandma Helen afterward, and she told me that my father had tried to frame the withdrawals as a family financial decision that had been misunderstood. The Reverend, who had known our family for 20 years, and who was not a man given to being easily managed, had reportedly said, Kenneth, a misunderstanding is when two people have different information. This is one person having information, and another person not having it. He asked my father to consider what restitution might look like. Darius called me for the first time in 2 years. He was quiet. He sounded like he'd been crying, or hadn't slept, or both. He said, Nadia, I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know where the money came from. I believed him, actually. Darius was a lot of things, but I don't think he was capable of knowing something like that, and staying quiet about it. He was too transparent for sustained deception. I said, I believe you. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. There was a long pause, and he said, I don't know how to fix this. I said, that's not your job, Darius. It's theirs. He said, okay. We stayed on the phone for a few more minutes, not saying much. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since we were children. Type chosen in the comments if you've ever had to become your own family. If you've ever had to decide that the people who were supposed to show up for you just aren't going to, and that you're going to build something anyway. Type chosen, because that's what this whole story is really about. The real conversation happened on a Saturday in December 2018, at Grandma Helen's house. I had asked for it. I had called my parents and said, I want us to talk in person at Grandma's house, with Bettina present if that's okay. My mother said yes immediately. My father took a day to agree. We sat in Grandma Helen's living room, the room with the needlepoint on the walls and the framed photos on every surface, and the Persian rug she'd had since before my mother was born. Grandma Helen sat in her reading chair. Bettina sat in the corner near the bookshelf. My parents sat on the sofa. I sat in the chair across from them. The room smelled like cardamom, and the winter light came through the window at a low angle and put a stripe of gold across the floor. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time, probably 5 seconds. But 5 seconds of silence between people who need to speak is enormous. It fills the room completely. My mother's eyes were red. My father sat very straight, the way he always did when he was trying to project control, hands on his thighs, jaw set. He looked older than I had expected. Tired. They both did. I spoke first. I said, I don't want to fight. I want to say some things, and I want you to hear them, and then I want to figure out what comes next. Can you do that? My mother nodded. My father said, yes. I said, when I was 11, I missed a summer program at Ohio State because we didn't have $488. That same week you spent $650 on baseball for Darius. I told myself it didn't matter. When I was 14, I missed a science competition in Cincinnati because we didn't have the budget. 2 days later you bought curtains. I told myself it didn't matter. When I was 17 you missed my honors banquet for a baseball playoff game. I told myself it didn't matter. I paused. I was not crying. My voice was steady. I told myself a lot of things didn't matter, for a lot of years because I wanted to believe that you saw me, that even if I wasn't your favorite, I was still seen. And then I found out that the one thing that had been set up specifically to prove that I was seen, the one concrete, documented, financial proof that I mattered to this family, you had taken, not borrowed, taken, and used it to build a house and buy a truck, and send Darius to a school he didn't finish. My father opened his mouth. I held up one hand gently, and he closed it. I'm not here to destroy you, I said. I don't want that. I want you to understand what it felt like to be 20 years old, with $12,000 left, and $93,000 in debt. I shouldn't have had, being told by my mother that I would figure it out, because I always land on my feet. I want you to understand that I did figure it out, and I do land on my feet, and that has never been a response to what you did. It's just who I am." My mother was crying now, quietly, tears running down her face, not wiping them, just letting them fall. My father was looking at his hands. I said, "I need two things from this conversation. First, I need you to acknowledge out loud that what happened was wrong. Not complicated. Not a misunderstanding. Wrong. Second, I need us to figure out what repayment looks like on a realistic timeline, because that money was mine, and I have $93,000 in loans that are a direct consequence of it being gone." My father looked up. He said, "Nadia." His voice was rough. He said, "What we did was wrong." He said it slowly, like each word cost something. "I told myself we were doing what was best for the family. I told myself you were strong enough that it wouldn't." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. "That's not an excuse. There is no excuse," he said. "I'm sorry. I am truly sorry." My mother said, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." And I sat there in that gold stripe of winter light, and I felt something very old and very tired go quiet inside me. Not healed, not resolved, just quiet, the way a long sound eventually ends. I said, "Okay." Bettina produced a document. It was a repayment agreement. Structured, legal, real, given my parents' income and assets. Bettina had drafted a plan, $1,200 a month for 12 years, which would cover the principal of the original fund with interest. It was not the full $174,800 in a lump sum. It was a realistic path towards something. My father read it carefully. My mother read it over his shoulder. He picked up the pen Bettina offered, and he signed. My mother signed. Grandma Helen, from her reading chair, said nothing. She simply watched, with her tea cooling on the table beside her, and when the documents were signed she said, "Good. Just that. Good." After the papers were signed, we sat in silence for a moment. Then my mother said, "Nadia, can I make us tea?" It was such a small thing, such a human, domestic, familiar thing. I looked at her red eyes, her shaking hands, this woman who had failed me in a very specific and documented way, and who was, nonetheless, my mother, and I said, "Yes, make tea." She went into the kitchen. The sounds of Grandma Helen's kitchen, the kettle filling, the cabinet opening, the familiar percussion of that house, came through the doorway, and my father and I sat across from each other in the winter light, and he said, quietly, "You turned out remarkable." And I said, "I know," and I meant it without arrogance, the way you can sometimes mean a true thing cleanly. We drank tea. We didn't pretend everything was okay. We didn't hug and call it resolved. But we drank tea in Grandma Helen's living room, with the needlepoint on the walls and the Persian rug, and the photo of me in my nursing school graduation gown above her desk, and it was the beginning of something that I cannot give a name to yet, something small and careful and real. Grandma Helen died in April 2021, in the room where she had lived for 40 years with me holding her hand. She was 85. She went quietly, on a Sunday morning, with the cardamom and sugar smell of her kitchen in the air, and a cup of cold tea on the nightstand, and her locks spread across the pillow like a crown. She had been declining since Christmas, slowly and with great dignity, the way she did everything. She had told me, in February, that she was ready. She had held my face in both hands and said, "You don't owe me anything, you know. You never did. I did what I did because you were worth it. Because you are worth it." I said, "I know, Grandma." She said, "Don't forget." I said, "I won't forget. I have not forgotten." The wooden box in her study, the one she had shown me at her 80th birthday party, contained, among other things, a handwritten letter to me, 14 pages in her careful, even script, a copy of every account statement from the first federal fund, dating back to 1994, a copy of every withdrawal my parents had made, and every document Bettina had filed, and a final account statement showing a separate savings account in my name that Grandma Helen had quietly opened at a different bank in 2013, after she discovered what my parents had done. Over the following 8 years, she had deposited into it every dollar she could spare, birthday money she hadn't spent, Christmas checks, the proceeds from her needlepoint sales at the arts fair, a small structured amount from her monthly budget that she had cut other things to afford. The balance was $31,200. $31,200 that she had rebuilt, by hand, dollar by dollar, in secret, just for me. I sat on the floor of her back study and read her 14-page letter from beginning to end, and I cried. Finally, the way I had not cried since I was 20 years old sitting in a dorm room staring at a wall. I cried until I couldn't. And then I sat in the silence of her house and felt her everywhere. In the smell of the room, the texture of the Persian rug, the photo of me in my graduation gown above the desk, still centered, still front and center, and I said out loud to the room, "I see you, Grandma. I have always seen you." It is now March 2026. I am 31 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati. I moved back here 2 years ago for a position as a senior charge nurse and clinical educator in the pediatric critical care unit at Children's Hospital of Cincinnati. The apartment is on the fourth floor and has windows that face east, so I wake up to light most mornings. I have a small vegetable garden on the balcony, tomatoes, herbs, one ambitious pepper plant, because Deja taught me that growing things is its own kind of medicine. I have a bookshelf full of books I've actually read, and a kitchen where I cook real breakfasts, and a framed photo of Grandma Helen above my desk, centered front and center, because she was and will always be the person who saw me first. I have $0 in student loan debt. I paid off the last $11,400 in January 2025. I made the final payment on a Wednesday morning from my car in the hospital parking garage, level 4, row C, which I did not plan but which felt, when I realized it, like something being completed. I sat in the same kind of fluorescent-lit garage stillness I'd sat in 12 years earlier, and instead of my mother saying some of it, I heard nothing at all, and the nothing was perfect. My parents make their repayment installment every month. We have dinner when I visit Claremont, which is a few times a year. It is not the warm family relationship that I might have wanted when I was 9 years old sitting on a kitchen counter, being told that my brain was the one thing no one could take. It is honest, and it is adult, and it is real in the way that only things stripped down to their true structure can be real. My father asks about my work. My mother sends me recipes. Darius and I text occasionally, which is more than I expected and maybe the right amount. His life has stabilized. He's working in fleet management for a logistics company in Columbus. He has a daughter named Maya who is 3 years old, and the photo he sent me of Maya's birthday cake was so delightfully chaotic that I saved it to my phone. She looks just like him. She looks just like my grandmother. Priya is still my person. Tomas still brings coffee to meetings, he doesn't have to. Deja's garden is bigger every year. These are the people I chose, who chose me back, who have never once made me feel that my capability was a substitute for their care. Here is what I know. From the other side of all of it. What my parents did was not an ambiguous harm. It was specific and documented, and financially quantifiable. It cost me 8 years of student loan payments, and hours of my one life that I spent working to rebuild what had been taken. That is real. I don't soften it. And also, the person I became in the building of that rebuilt life is not a lesser version of who I would have been if none of it had happened. She is not better or worse. She is exact. She is the person who learned to count every dollar and still find beauty in a CVS receipt. The person who learned to work a night shift and still care about the child in the bed in front of her. The person who learned that some things are taken, and that taken is not the same as lost, and that the difference between the two is everything. Grandma Helen used to say, "The world will try to make you small. Don't you let it?" I think about that on the hard days. I think about her hands folding my clothes in that particular origami way, and the sound of her kitchen at 8 p.m., and the way she stood up in the front row and clapped so hard her glasses fell off her nose. I think about $31,200 rebuilt in secret, dollar by dollar, over 8 years, because she had promised something and she kept it, not because she had to. Because that's what love actually looks like when it's real. It keeps the promise even when it costs something, even when no one is watching, even when it takes years. This isn't a story about revenge. I want to be clear about that because people will say it is. But revenge is about making someone else feel pain. This is about something different. This is about architecture. It's about what you build when the structure you were supposed to have is taken, and you have to pour your own foundation, and the foundation you pour is yours in a way the original never quite was. No one can take what you built with your own hands. Not even the people who were supposed to protect it. I am 31 years old. I have a balcony garden and a kitchen that smells like real breakfasts, and a photo of my grandmother above my desk, and a job that I love with my whole chest. I have chosen people who choose me back. I have a final loan payment receipt in a folder on my phone that I look at sometimes just because I can. I have 14 handwritten pages in my grandmother's voice that I will never ever let anyone touch. I have, against all available odds, an extraordinary life. And Claremont, Ohio knows exactly how I got here. Thank you so much for watching this. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you've ever been the invisible child, the capable one, the one who was supposed to just figure it out, I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments. Drop a scene if you've been that person. Drop a showson if you've built your own family from the people who showed up. I read every single comment, every one, and you all remind me every single week why this channel exists. If you're new here, please subscribe. This is a space for people who are building things, who are on the other side of something hard, or who are right in the middle of it and need to know the other side is real. It is real. I promise you, it is real. Check the description for a link to another story that I think you need to hear. It's about a woman who found out, at 43, that she'd been left out of her own grandfather's will because of a forged signature, and what she did with that truth. I think you'll recognize something in her. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Eat a real breakfast. And don't you let anyone make you small.